Presenter Roland Minton. Roland is the author of Golf by the Numbers on the science and statistics of golf, Sports Math on sports science and analytics, and is the co-author of the Minton Calculus series. He has taught at Roanoke College for 32 years, and you only have 2 sentences of a bio here somehow after 32 years, but I'm sure you have a lot more that we can say. But you want to hear him talk, so ladies and gentlemen, Roland Minton.
Thanks. Thanks to Scott for putting this together. It's a lot of work. I appreciate you being here. Also appreciate the location right after an NFL talk. I don't know if you hopefully are interested in the golf, but otherwise didn't have a chance to escape after the NFL talk. And hopefully you'll find this one interesting. So I am talking about golf, and the main idea is these are the results for #1 in the world, Dustin Johnson, from last year. So this was a win, second place. Down here is a missed cut. And it looks kind of chaotic. Great result, missed the cut. Bunch of good results, mediocre results, missed the cut. And my question really is there any marker, any indication in his statistics about why the severe ups and downs? What can we predict about golfers? So I'll get back to that in a second, but some background in case you're not fully conversant with golf stats. The PGA has done a marvelous thing. A little over 10 years ago, they introduced ShotLink, which is a system of lasers and volunteers like this jovial fellow. And what they do is mark a lot of data on every shot on the PGA Tour. So, for example, this is one of about 1.2 million shots recorded in 2008. Highlighted a couple things. This is on the 15th hole. It's the first shot the player took on that hole. It's Tommy Armour. Started on the tee box, finished on the green. Started 5,171 inches from the hole. Finished 228 inches from the hole. Fair amount of other data there. Fantastic data set. If you want some data mining opportunities, I highly recommend this. PGA Tour does give access to academics. So I've been very generous with that. What a variety of people have done, and several of us did this independently, is turn this into measurements that can break down golf into its components. So just to give you an example, let's say this is on this hole, the tee shot's hit right down the middle. Really nice approach, 6 feet from the green. I'll say the guy two-putted it. If I've got data, perhaps I know that the average score on this hole is 4.38. But from a location in the middle of the fairway, 140 yards out, the average score is 3.96. 6 feet from the hole, the average score would be 3.43. So what we can do then is say that tee shot improved the golfer's average score or expected score by 0.42 strokes. That would be 0.42 strokes gained for that tee shot. Then the approach shot further reduced the expected score by 53. So we would credit strokes gained 0.53 for that particular shot. From the fairway, 140 yards or whatever category you want. Average score there, 3.43. If we miss the putt, end up with a score of 4, that would be putting worse than average 0.57 strokes. Now golf is unfortunate in that plus and minus is either good or bad. So I'll try to stick with worse than average, better than average. And yeah. All right, so just to summarize that, expected score, if we have an expected score from every line distance to the hole, we just look at the expected score after the shot versus the expected score before the shot. The difference is the value of that particular shot. And the name that's been given to this, I think, is a good name, strokes gained. And it's become an official stat on the PGA Tour. All right, my version of it, I do base it on distance from the hole and the lie. It's in the data set, it's marked as fairway, intermediate rough, primary rough, a couple of other categories. I average it over all the different holes. As the data set grows, I think people will be able to come up with reasonable expected scores on a given course, maybe even on a given hole. Right now the data is still collecting. I do round corrections, so compute for the whole season the player ratings and then look at the player ratings in a given round and then use that. So perhaps the course is hard or the weather was really bad that day. So if scores were worse than average in a particular category, then I'll credit it back to the players and kind of do an iterative technique to try to balance the round effects from the actual player effects. I do 21 different categories. I've got putting, shots from the fringe, greenside bunkers, tee shots, par 3, 4, and 5. I separated 4 and 5 because often on par 4s the pros are not hitting the driver, kind of a collection of different clubs. Shots from the fairway broken down into 50-yard categories, shots from the rough, short or long. Recovery shots, layup shots, penalty shots, intermediate rough, miscellaneous, a lot of different categories. All right, so before getting to my main question, I thought I'd share some results. And this is from a website that I put together for my golf book, ShotLink.html. Last year, Dustin Johnson was #1 in this rating system. If you look at it overall, that says that he was 2.1289 strokes better than the average PGA golfer per round in his results in 2017. A little bit better, about 0.11 strokes better than #2, who was Ricky Fowler. If you can read this all the way back, Steve Stricker's #3. Steve Stricker's always really highly rated in this, my way of doing things. The data that I've got does not include any of the major tournaments, and Stricker's somewhat noted for not playing really well in the majors. So that's not taken into account in this effect. And this is just all the shots, no particular extra credit for it being in a strong tournament. All right. If you're interested in putting, Steve Stricker was #1 last year. Ricky Fowler, Brooks Koepka just won the U.S. Open. Patrick Reed was in the top 5 U.S. Open. You see a lot of great golfers. Give you a really early idea that putting is important if you didn't know that beforehand. Par 5 tee shots you'll see is also being important. Last year McIlroy was #1, Dustin Johnson #2, John Rahm, one of the young phenoms, is #4. Again, a very strong list of golfers. There was one year when Bubba Watson was #1 and J.R. Holmes was #2. And I love wordplay, so Watson and Holmes being at the top of the list. I'm using. All right, just shots from the fairway. This is 50 to 100 yards, so it's fairly short shot. Phil Mickelson, well known for a short game. Daniel Berger, also good. Jordan Spieth, really good in the short game. So if you're a golf fan at all, you can page through these and see who's got what skills, see who's good out of the rough or from whatever situation. Had Dustin Johnson up as #1 if you're interested in past #1s. Jason Day was #1 the 3 years previous. Thing in parenthesis would be in 2016 Day was 2.11 strokes better than the average golfer. That's 0.11 better than second place. So that gives you the margin down to second place. Back to 2013, Tiger Woods' last really good year, fairly dominant, 0.42 strokes per round better than second place. 2.5 better than the average golfer. Rory McIlroy, a really dominant year in 2012. Steve Stricker, barely #1 in the previous year. So if you think McIlroy's had the most dominant year in recent history, we put up the 6 previous years. And this is ridiculous. 2008, Tiger was 3.5 strokes better than the average golfer per round, 2 strokes per round better than second place on tour. Hugely dominant, and the 2 years around that, and also that little bit, almost a stroke better per round than anybody else. And he was really high up in almost every single category. So, hugely dominant. But let me get back to my main question, which was what's causing the ups and downs. So that's a repeat of the previous slide. And this one up is good, that's first place up at the top and missed the cut down at the bottom. This is Johnson's putting strokes gained per tournament, same tournaments. It is upside down, so this is good, better than average, and that's worse than average. So if putting was everything, these two would be exact mirror images of each other. So this tournament, he had a very bad putting tournament and he missed the cut. So if putting were controlling everything, when he had a great tournament, his putting would be great, which it isn't really. He had an equally bad putting tournament in his first one and a top 5 finish. A little bit later, a fairly bad putting with a really good finish. And in the other time he missed the cut, he actually didn't have that bad of a putting round. So my question is, out of all the different skills, what is it that controls ups and downs? But more than that, if a player has a particular strength or a weakness, is there something there? When they do well, is it because the strengths get better or because they're able to cover up their weaknesses in that particular week? So that's what I'll try to look at. So I need a definition for strengths and weaknesses, which I didn't expect to be hard because I've got strokes gained. I figure the skill with the best strokes gained would be the strength. The skill with the worst strokes gained would be the weakness. However, what to compare it to? I started off comparing 2017 events to the previous year season values, which seemed reasonable, except that in golf, correlations from one year to the next are really low in almost all skills. A great putter one year is not likely to be real great the next. Driving is the only one of those skills that's really consistent. Good driver one year maintains good driving the next year. So I thought comparing to the previous season probably was not the best. So what you'll be looking at mostly is comparing it to the same season values, but in the events excluding that particular event. Okay? So the rest of the season is what I'm comparing to. I've got one line per player event, about 4,500 of them for 2017. I did other years and pretty much had the same results. A little bit of demographic information, 22 skills for the season, so the baseline to compare to, 22 skills for the event. That's the 21 I showed you earlier plus the grand total, the sum. So here's a quick start on this. So these are correlations to the event ranking. So this is for the baseline, the season skills. Players that were better drivers did better in the tournaments. Players that were good or bad putters, it kind of didn't matter. Very little correlation overall. In the event itself, the players who putted well that week did better. Tee shots on the par 5s was the best predictive single skill, which surprised me a lot. The other surprise here is the overall strokes gained for that week only had a correlation to the event ranking of about 0.26. And that made me decide I did the wrong thing. So in golf, you play the first 2 rounds and then a lot of the players get cut. They don't play the last 2 rounds. So the players that get cut don't actually have an official ranking at the end. So what I did was just assign a 90th place to anybody who missed the cut. And I didn't think this really made a whole lot of sense. So I just removed all the players that missed the cut. For those that made the cut, now the strokes gained for the week has a 0.56 correlation to the ranking. And that makes a whole lot more sense. Not a whole lot of information from the season skills other than players that were better for the year were better in that tournament probably. And drives were a good predictor. In the event itself, putting had the highest correlation, drives pretty close, and I was second. So then I looked at, I didn't really want to completely throw away the missed cut data. So look at the values for the players who made the cut versus the ones who missed the cut. Not much in the season baseline data other than players that made the cut tended to be better players. Not a big surprise. In the event itself, players who made the cut were about 4 strokes better in the round than players who missed the cut. Iron play, a little bit important. Putting, by far the #1 predictor here. Of the 4 strokes per round that the players were better, half of it was from putting. So putting up and down, a big factor. All right, I did want to look at strengths and weaknesses. So I took each of those lines and ordered them based on the season values. So the baseline values from best strokes gained to worst strokes gained, strengths to weaknesses. Then looked at the event values in that same order. And it looks pretty good, in a way. Strengths, their performance in the strengths correlated 0.3 with the actual ranking, and with the weaknesses, about 0.36. So is it strengths or weaknesses? Well, yes, it is one or the other that seems to correlate the best with the result. It doesn't seem to be that it's in a great week, all of the skills get better that week. It seems to be a strength is improved or a weakness is improved based on that. However, no studies are ever all that clean. I did think to look at which of the skills were the strengths. So this is a plot of how many golfers had putting as their #1 strength. And it was over 1,000, and then the #1 weakness, putting over 1,200. So 2/3 of the golfers had putting as either their #1 strength or #1 weakness. So the largest strokes gained or the smallest strokes gained. So really that previous graph was more a picture of what putting does than what strengths and weaknesses does. Driving was second most important. First or second strength or first or second weakness, about 70% of the players had driving as top 2. Just for comparison, fairway shots from 50 to 100, almost nobody had it as a strength or a weakness. Otherwise, kind of uniformly distributed in between. All right, I thought this was a nice storied graphic. So this is just for the winners of the tournaments. And these are the actual values for 12 kind of combined skills. This is putting. And this is worse than average, that's better than average. So the winners didn't exactly come from putters who, for the whole season, were especially good. Several of the winners weren't good putters for the whole season. However, this is driving. You had to be a good driver to win. So this is the baseline, and all of these guys are better than average. There's only one who was just a little bit worse than average for the whole season. In the actual tournament, they drove better than average, but not a whole lot different from what their baseline was. The putters all were great that week. So they weren't necessarily really good coming in, but that week they were phenomenal. So it's that big change from possibly a weakness to a strength that we're seeing in putting. Fairly decent, not quite as dramatic as the drives, but also the long irons. Most of the players were really good coming in and improved quite a bit during the tournament. All right, so here's a different look at kind of the same thing. This is for the players who missed the cut putting. This is average right in the middle. Not a whole lot of indication that players who missed the cut were especially good or bad putters, but that week they were pretty bad. If they were top 10, again, maybe a little bit better than average for the season, a whole lot better than average for the tournament. Driving, pretty much everybody's better than average if they're going to make the top 10, better than average during the week. So this is kind of a busy graphic, but hopefully it makes some sense. So this is starting off for players who won the tournament, and this is putting. This is how much better or worse than average they were if putting was a strength. So the strong putters improved about 2 strokes for that tournament, and the weak players improved about 6 strokes. They finished in the top 10, both strong and weak improved, but not quite as much. Bottom is made the cut, but did not finish top 10. They improved a little bit. This has got cut, and so the players who got cut, if putting had been a strength, it fell off. And you'll see that pattern again later. The players for whom putting was a weakness didn't especially do better or worse than what they had done previously. There's a little bit of regression to the mean effect here. Strong putters tended to be a little bit worse. Weak putters tend to be a little bit better. Driving has the same kind of pattern. There's good drivers coming into the tournament that got cut, were bad that week. Main thing here, 78% of the drivers that won were strong. You pretty much have to be a strong driver to win. Short irons, not really a whole lot of effect of any sort. Long irons, actually a bigger effect than driving. The ones who won improved their long irons quite a bit. The ones who were cut, if irons had been a strength, they had a bad week with their long irons. All right, so kind of adding all that together, the players who won, both strengths and weaknesses got a lot better. There wasn't a whole lot of difference. Top 10, both strengths and weaknesses got better, less of an improvement. Made the cut a little bit better than normal. Missed the cut way worse than normal, but especially the strengths were bad that week. So conclusions, putting is the most important factor. It shows up as the #1 strokes gained number for most of the golfers. It's the one that goes up and down the most week by week and up and down the most for the whole year. So volatile and therefore influential. At least in 2017 and 2007 and 2011 are the years I've looked at, you have to be a strong driver to win. So if you're betting on golf, look for guys who can drive the ball well, at least by the strokes gained percentage. Also, if you want a winner, they have to be pretty good long iron players and they have to have an especially good week with that. I'm not sure how to predict that one, but that seems to be an important factor. And the players who miss the cut, it's not really because their weaknesses get that much worse, it's because their strengths fall apart that week. So I got a little bit of my answer to, is it strengths or weaknesses? It is the culprit for strengths being the culprit behind a miscut. And that gets through it a little bit faster, but yes?
First of all, excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.
So I was amazed when you said that the putting dropped off, year to year. I was wondering if there was any kind of study done to find out what did these guys do that summer? Did they change equipment? Did they start lifting weights? Did they put on weight? Did they change their putting motion? Anything like that?
That's a great question. And there are some players that are consistently good golfers. Back in his prime, Tiger Woods was just always really good. If you look at somebody like Adam Scott, he's a guy who was a horrible putter, and then he got one of the really long putters that he stuck in his belly button so it wouldn't move. And then he got really good, and then they outlawed him, and he's back to being bad again. So it's not entirely unpredictable, but kind of for the mass of golfers. And the thing is, this is kind of like a comparison to replacement player. The important thing to realize is who I'm comparing it to, and these are the PGA golfers. But that's a tough standard, and they play really tough courses. So a little bit up and down, still going to be way better than me. But I don't know of any studies to kind of answer your question.
It'd be interesting to see the ones that stay the same. So I'm sure it's not everybody drops.
That's right.
So the ones that stay the same, what are they doing or not doing that the other guys are doing or not doing?
I've done some previous research. I had a theory that the ones who could stay the same would be better. And that was only partially true. There's a little bit of correlation between year-to-year consistency and quality.
Thank you.
Not as much as I wanted. So, yes.
When you have the drive and they hit a drive out and you figure out the strokes gained or whatever.
Yes.
What information do you have about where they are? Is it just distance to the hole, or do you actually
have distance to the hole, whether they're in the fairway, primary rough, intermediate rough, native grass area, water?
Okay, so the grading of a drive. Okay, so it's not like drive distance or whatever. It's like to what sort of lie and what distance to the
That's right.
hole.
And pretty consistently for any distance, if you miss the fairway, the pros have cost themselves about 1/4 of a stroke, which is about equal to 65 yards.
Is it by hole, or is it like for every shot that goes 100 yards from, or where you're 100 yards to the pin from the fairway do you count that for all courses the same, or for all?
For all courses the same.
Okay.
That's what I've done.
Okay.
And like there's now about 11 years of reliable data on this, so that might be enough to get course-specific ratings, which would be a big increase in the quality of these ratings.
Mm-hmm. And what do you have like for side lie? Do you know uphill, downhill, side
There's a
lie?
field for that. It's empty about 20% of the time, so I haven't tried to use it because of all the missing data. That's based on volunteers entering data, and it sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. Other questions? Yeah.
Have you looked at kind of each of your 21 categories as kind of like a rate statistic? So I would think putting would be overrepresented, right? Because you're going to have 30 putts around, on a course that's par 72, and,
Right.
and then your drives become important because you're going to have so many of those as well. Drives on par 5s and 4s and 3s. But then your intermediate approach shots from different categories aren't as plentiful.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely, and that's, so what I mostly have are ratings per shot. And what I was showing you is for that particular tournament, how many of them did they accumulate? The putting, I'd say, is I only do that per hole. So wherever the first putt is from, then how many putts does it take to get in from there? So it's not reevaluated. If they miss the first putt by 6 feet, I don't recalculate from 6 feet. It's just they start 30 feet, they should average 2.1 putts from it. So there's yeah. And on my rating side, I've got 2 different ratings. One is per shot and one is accumulated. Because I do think that can be an important distinction.
All right, how about a round of applause for Roland? Next, as the finishing touches are being put on the lunch buffet, I would ask that we head back to the alumni room for about 10-15 minutes. We're going to hear a couple of overviews of our poster research, as well as Roland a little bit more on his books, and another author, Dan Peterson. So please join me back in the alumni room in the first few minutes.